Good morning, students. Welcome to Biology 5090, the nervous system. We have already discussed about the nervous system introduction and the sensitivity of organisms. We have studied the sense organ in this topic. We discussed about the stimulus, that is change in the environment, and the receptors which receive the change of the environment, effectors that responds back according to the change, and the response may be of voluntary according to the will and involuntary, that might be a spinal reflex. And then in any kind of response or in any kind of voluntary or involuntary action, neurons are involved. That's what the topic is about. And what are neurons or what are nervous tissues? The nervous system is made up of nervous tissue. Nervous tissue consists of nerve cells that are neurons, and neurons are the basic functional unit of the nervous system. So here you can see the structure of two kinds of neuron. One is sensory neuron and the other is motor neuron. And what is the function of the sensory neuron? Basically, it transmits nerve impulse from the sense organs or the receptors to the central nervous system. And what is the function of the motor neuron? Motor neuron transmits nerve impulses from the nervous system back to the effectors. And in between the sensory neuron and motor neuron, where you can see the dendrites of the two neurons, there is an other neuron that is known as relay neuron or intermediate neuron. Relay neuron and intermediate neuron transmits nerve impulses from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. The intermediate neurons are found within the central nervous system. And when the messages are conveying or transmitting from one neuron to another neuron, or from the dendrites of the one neuron to the dendrites of the other neuron, a synapse is created. Synapse is basically the junction between the two neurons where all the message transfers from one neuron to another neuron. A generalized structure of the neuron I have told you in the last lecture, but here you can see the dendrites of the both neurons, cell body is present, and the direction of impulse from the sense organ along with the axon of the sensory neuron, and then the direction of the impulse of the motor neuron coming back to the effector or the muscle fibers. So sense receptors are present in the sensory neuron, and motor neuron ends up at the motor end plate. What is the difference between sensory and motor neuron? There are structural and functional differences. The structure of the sensory neuron has the position of the cell body near the end of the neuron in a ganglion just outside the spinal cord, and a motor neuron is present at the start of the neuron inside the gray matter of the spinal cord. Dendrites are present at the end of the neuron, but in the motor neuron, dendrites are attached to the cell body. The axon of the sensory neuron is very short, the axon of the motor neuron is very long, and dendron is very long in the sensory neuron. What is the functional difference? Sensory neuron transmit the impulse from sense organ to the central nervous system, and motor neuron brings back the message from the central nervous system to the muscles or glands. Now that was all about the functional unit, nerve cells or neurons of the nervous system. Now what are the parts of the central nervous system? They are brain and spinal cord. Brain is further divided into three parts, that is forebrain, hindbrain, midbrain. What is the function of the forebrain? Forebrain processes sensory information, helps with reasoning and problem solving, and regulates autonomic functions. What are autonomic functions? Autonomic functions are basically involuntary functions. And it also produces many important hormones, and overall control of voluntary actions is also depending on the forebrain. Then the midbrain concerned with the sight and visual reflexes. It controls the eyesight or the sight capabilities of a person. Hindbrain helps to regulate autonomic functions and controls muscular coordination, especially helps in maintaining the balance of the body, control involuntary actions, that is heartbeat, peristalsis, and rate of respiratory movement. Now, spinal cord. Spinal cord is a dense bundle of nerves that runs down the middle of the spine. From the brain, you can say that it is a kind of extension of the brain. And it enables us to do things automatically. It is protected by the vertebral column or the backbone of the body, just as brain is protected into the skull and few membranes that are known as meninges. That was about the central nervous system. Now peripheral nervous system. It is composed of all the ganglia and nerves outside the brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system consists of 43 pairs of nerves. This system connects the sensory and motor impulses between the central nervous system and the body. Basically, these are the peripheral nerves are the nerves which are carrying impulses from the brain to the organ or from the organ to the brain. Nerves that connect the central nervous system to various parts of the body are present in the peripheral nervous system. Peripheral nervous system is basically a system which is a like of network of neuron present or separated in the body of the organism. And peripheral nervous system or the central nervous system controls two types of actions, that is voluntary actions or the involuntary actions. Voluntary actions or involuntary actions depending on the central nervous system or the peripheral nervous system, like on the brain or the spinal cord. Or if we talk about peripheral nervous system, cranial nerves from the brain and spinal nerves from the spinal cord and the sense organs are there. So voluntary action requires thinking. You can perform that according to your will. Involuntary actions takes place without thinking and sometimes without your knowledge even. Voluntary action is slower. Involuntary action is fast. Voluntary action is controlled mainly by the brain, and involuntary action is controlled mainly by the spinal cord. Involuntary actions are the certain actions which can save you from damages or accidental conditions. Voluntary actions are everyday actions, like if you want to walk a mile, that would be a voluntary action. Your muscles will move according to you. Your speed will be decided by you, and so many other examples. Now, what is reflex action? It is a rapid autonomic response, automatic response to the environment that happens without the action from the brain. If anything happen, as you know that nerve impulse is transmitted within a fraction of second. For example, when a person touches your hand, you feel it almost immediately. And in response to this stimulus, the central nervous system will send nerve impulses to the muscles, and the muscles will then contract, or you will get away from that person. But what happens in the reflex action? It is automatic. When a person or when a thing is hit on your knee, the sensory neurons take the message to the spinal cord, and then the spinal cord interpret the message and response or commands accordingly, and the motor neuron brings back the command immediately. So here you can see that nerves are going into the spinal cord, and there is a connection between the spinal cord and the brain, but the spinal cord itself is sending back the messages. So what is reflex action? Reflex action is rapid automatic response. Reflex action is rapid automatic response. It is the simplest form of the response in humans and occurs without any conscious effort. And you cannot stop or prevent the reflex actions. It is an immediate response to a specific stimulus. Kinds of reflexes: motor reflex, for example, blinking of eyes, and conditioned reflex action developed through memory. Like if something has happened to you once, your conscious or your spinal cord will act accordingly next time when you face the situation. So here is the example that what happens when your hand touches a hot object. What is the sequence of events in a reflex action? Here you can see the flame, and the fingertip just touches the flame. Sensory neuron is there. Sensory neuron is taking the messages to the spinal cord, and then spinal cord is sending back. There is an interneuron in the spinal cord, and the spinal cord is sending back the messages via motor neuron, and motor neuron is causing the muscle of the finger to contract, like to get back the fingers from the flame. And as we have discussed earlier that in between the dendrites of the two neurons, a junction form, that is synapse, where actually the nerve impulse or nerve messages transmit from one neuron to another neuron. So what is synapse? A junction between two neurons, a junction between a neuron and an effector, that might be a muscle or a gland, right? When the motor neuron ends up at a muscle effector, then the dendrites of the motor neuron or end terminal of the motor neuron delivers the message by creating a synapse between the muscle and the motor neuron. And what are neurotransmitters? Synapse involve neurotransmitters. Nerve impulses are transmitted across the synapse by certain chemicals released by the neuron, which are known as neurotransmitters. And the example of the neurotransmitter is the acetylcholine. This is a chemical. Neurotransmitter is basically a chemical which is helpful, or which is important in delivering the message from one neuron to the other neuron. So this was all about the nervous system. Thank you so much, and I would like you to solve test yourself exercises and structured and free response questions from biology matters in your notebook. MCQs and true false you can fill in your book, and please go through the other reference books. Please solve your past paper questions and ATP questions related to this topic, and if you have any queries, we will be discussing in the meeting. Thank you so much. Best of luck.